Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to join you from Sydney at not a terrible hour, I think, for either of us. So it's really good to be here. If you want to bring up those slides when we get a moment, that would be great. So I'm really excited to be here, as I said, and I'm really wanting to share with you something that's obviously very passionate. I'm very passionate about, and something I'm really hoping that to inspire some interest and some good questions and discussion as we go through. So as Hayley said, I've been working in the sustainability area for about 20 years, and I've worked across a range of different sectors. You can go to the next slide. What I really want to share with you today is my experiences, and as you can see, hopefully they're a little bit relatable. My experiences working with different, I guess, communication cohorts of people, and very much drawing on, I guess, the elation when things go really well and some of the frustrations that I as a practitioner experience, and maybe we can kind of share those together and come to a good place. So I've worked with a range of different communication teams. So from brand marketing teams on carbon neutral products, external comms teams on either ESG or environmental sustainability disclosures, the internal teams are looking at policy or messaging around sustainability for our people and suppliers or customers. I've also worked with media and crisis teams when things maybe haven't gone so well, or when actually they've gone really right and we want to communicate exactly what we're doing. So as I said, these experiences very much come from, I guess, stages of elation and maybe not elation. So I'm sure you can relate as well. So I just want to go through that. Can we move to the next slide, please? So what I really want to, I guess, my premise, if you like, of the talk today is really, without communication, our sustainability stories remain unheard and our progress then remains unchanged. And I do really believe, and I've learned this in some ways the hard way, I guess, that there is a really strong symbiotic relationship between the sustainability practitioner, whether it's an individual or a team in an organisation, and the communications, again, team, individual in different times. So I think that if I'm brought in often in an organisation, if you like, to support making the news, but really it's the telling of the news that I think is as equally as important. And that's a loop, if you like. So the more that we make, the more that's told, and the more that's then asked from what we're telling is the more that we're responding to. And I think, like anything, it does need to have a balance, but it's really that two parts that I think are quite critical, and the communications group and cohorts are incredibly important in helping us get that right message out. So we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So really the ingredients that I've seen from my experiences and what's worked really well is, obviously, you need something to talk about. And I think there's times when, and that's a quite a complex topic, because that'll be different and dependent on every audience and the outcome that you're seeking. So I think that's the first one. The second one is really a communicator who respects the facts and the audience. One of the downsides is sometimes getting the messages incorrect or misleading or not complete enough for the audience. And that is something that I think is really important. But similarly, in that third point there, is really a sustainability practitioner who actually understands the need to communicate. And I come from a technical background, as you heard before, and often we don't necessarily appreciate the nuances in communication. And I think that's an important learning and lesson that we need to have as well. We can move to the next slide. So what really are we talking about when we talk about sustainability communications? So we go to the next slide, thanks. So really there are a whole bunch of different areas, but I wanted to focus probably on three main ones here. The first one is the external reports and disclosures. So there's about 90% of the S&P 500 index companies that publish formal sustainability reports. This number's been growing, year on year, and I think the general trend for consumers, investors, customers, a whole range of different stakeholders wanting to understand more about a company's performance, not just from the financial side, but also from, I guess, the environmental, social and governance side, is escalating. So these reports are incredibly important. They are often reflective of the targets that have been set and where the company has landed. And sometimes they will have, the forward-looking statements from a sustainability perspective of where the organisation's heading. And these are used quite heavily, from different investors or different actors in that value chain, whether it's a customer or a supplier. From a product perspective, and that's the photograph on the left. For those of you who are located maybe in Australia, that's a bottle of Thank You, which is a social enterprise. It's a hand wash. They have a tracking device, that number there in that corner. Actually, if you scan that and enter it into their website, you can track their impact. Their premise really is they're a social enterprise, as I said. All of their profits run through a foundation and go into their purpose or their cause. And one of their main purposes is around sanitation, access to water, that sort of thing. So the on-product communication, I think, is really important. And recent studies from the New York University Stern Center of Sustainable Business completed a study into the US consumers' actual purchasing of packaged goods, and found that 50% of those products that had a sustainability, I guess, angle or marketing or proposition had a 50% growth in the 2013 to 2018 time. There's also an ability to charge a premium, so that's quite a lucrative market at the moment from either a price or positioning perspective for sustainability propositions linked to products. The one in the top right corner there is really around companies who are making, I guess, quite a strong stand around transparency and how they communicate the origins of their products or their services. And so that organisation there looks at providing, it's a clothing brand, and they look at providing full disclosure around, where their products come from, how it was made, all those sorts of things, and the origins. That is increasingly becoming very attractive. Consumers want to know more, but practitioner point, it's actually really challenging to get back to the origin sometimes and communicate that thing. But really that business model and looking at the B Corporation, which you might be familiar with, is incredibly important and something that's really growing. There are over 3,564 B Corps in 74 countries across 150 industries. And that was the number as quoted as last night when I was just validating my stats. But the first 82 B Corps were actually registered in 2007. So there is a massive push to actually bring a position or a sustainability aspect right into the core and the constitution, if you like, and core purpose of the business. And this is something that communications professionals can be really attracted to and really useful in communicating as well. The other aspect there, which I haven't got an image of, but which I think goes without saying, is the internal communications, and also how we inspire employees or those working for us in different businesses to actually understand what they need to do specifically in their role to drive or assist delivering the organisation's broader sustainability purpose. We can move to the next slide. So what's driving the need to communicate? I think, if I was in charge of the world, I'm sure we would all do this as a standard procedure, but actually are not, and it does have a lot of external push and pressure and interest. So we can move to the next one. Thank you. There's a huge amount of drive coming from the investor community, and I think that's been really crystallised by the various CEO letters that come from BlackRock. BlackRock is the largest asset manager, which has $74 trillion in assets under management as at the end of last year. And they have a very strong position around wanting disclosure for an organisation's sustainability or climate change performance particularly. I think also there's been recent activity of CEOs signing different business roundtable statements to say that, unlike the initial premise that an organisation is there purely to serve the shareholders, that there is a growing and widening recognition that organisations have responsibility or duty to stakeholders. And that broadens that out much further than just the investment community, but into your employees, your customers, your suppliers, the more general population. The photo down the bottom there is really around that consumer push. And as I said, I've been doing this for sort of 20 years, and I think the escalation that we've seen from consumer push and interest, particularly from the rise of social media, I think is quite phenomenal. This is a campaign from Fashion Revolution called Who Made My Clothes? And that really speaks to showing the workers in the apparel supply chain, textile and apparel supply chain, around where did my clothes come from. And this was very much born from the Rana Plaza building collapse. And that's really sparked, I guess, a whole sort of fashion revolution around sustainable fashion and textiles. And the last one there on the left is the regulator. And I think with this consumer push and investor push, and it's hard to say which one goes first, but I think they're all quite interconnected. In Australia, we're working through a new act around modern slavery and how that is impacting organisations and their disclosures, both operationally and within their supply chain. And this is something that's being mirrored in other jurisdictions. There's a Californian Transparency in Supply Chain Act and the similar act in the UK around modern slavery. So we are really seeing regulators also requiring disclosures, and those disclosures need to be, clear, accurate, in compliance and consistent. And I think that in itself can actually be quite challenging at the coalface when you're trying to really do that from that practitioner level. If you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So the one here is really around, is purpose the new black, or is this something, and, for us in our space, and for many of you, if you've worked in that sustainability communications area, this won't necessarily be a new theory, but there's a lot of studies now that are coming out to say that there's actually, a massive push. So this study here is from a 2020 Porter Novelli executive purpose study, where they surveyed 150 business leaders to get their perspectives on purpose, and 85% of the leaders said it's no longer acceptable just to make money. You actually also need to have a positive impact. Now, look, granted, it's a small study, but I think what's quite compelling is those same leaders then cited stakeholders all wanting something different as probably the number one barrier for inaction, or how you can't actually necessarily respond. And what we're starting to see is there's this tension of we want everything all of the time, but actually to report that and to find that information is really hard. And then you have to make it really simple so everyone understands it and then does something about it. So I think it's a good problem to have, but it's certainly quite a challenging one to go through that. And that really leads us into that in the next slide there, where we talk about, in some ways, the risks. And so if you can, thank you. The risks of getting it wrong, and I'm sure, every comms person would have the experience of things not going to plan. The risks of getting it wrong, I guess, are getting higher. And one of the most interesting reports that I've seen more recently is from KPMG around sustainability fraud. Now, as the disclosures and calls for disclosures from companies on sustainability become higher, so does the onus on the accuracy and the transparency and the correctness of those messages. And what tends to happen is if you're from, whether it's deliberate or whether it's accidental, you can get caught up in a whole bunch of different challenges around that misleading kind of conduct or misleading representations. Now, in a consumer product sense, we have regulators that heavily govern that, but I think we're starting to see some of those requirements now also coming in to the sustainability disclosure aspects. The other thing I think is also really important to understand, and this is something I've definitely seen firsthand, is our audiences are now self-educating. And, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I used to first respond to, customer queries for sustainability, the queries were quite, simple to respond to. They weren't particularly nuanced. They were general around, hey, what are you guys doing about X? And we would give them the explanation. The questions now are coming very specific. They want a lot of detail, and you kind of have this spectrum of audiences who want the light touch just to let me know everything's okay, right through to I want the full detail, I want everything, and I might not stop until I get it. That creates a really interesting challenge, because we, on our side of, I guess, making or finding the information, can't always respond as quickly. So how do we actually manage that and work together to create that almost continuous kind of stream, or that response to those needs? There's also the piece around, it's much better to be, and I'm definitely not the comms expert, but, proactive in some ways, but often we're caught being reactive. And how do you get ahead of what could happen, and how do you actually build up those channels by which you can put that information through and down, so that it actually helps give the transparency that might be required. And I think it's really important, particularly from a communications perspective, and is really we report it as it is, not as we wish it was or as we hope it to be. And I think that's a really important message, and that's where that, both the sustainability side who's creating the outcome of the project or what have you, and the communicators who's telling what's happened, need to work really well in partnership. I think also what the risk is you can overwhelm the audience, and we like to talk about, we think that we're being really clear when we're talking from a technical sense, but often that's not what the audience is wanting. So the role of the communicator is really help, streamline that message and focus it. And that way we can make all our efforts focused and clearer, and actually get that cut through and that positive response that we're looking for. If you just move to the next slide. Thank you. So the rewards of getting it right, I think, are really important as well. And if you have that effective and efficient communication, you're actually bringing in the external, and you're getting a litmus test to then know, okay, well, where is our audience heading, and what might that do to what we're trying to achieve internally, and how do we bring those together and respond, or how do we answer questions that we're not in a position to change or answer to, and how do you kind of start building that through? So I think also there's an economic argument. Again, studies, and I'm sure there'll be counter studies in most things when we talk about statistics, but there's the 2020 Sustainable Market Share Index. And I think that that's been a really interesting report to look for, but it's about that, again, around that growth in sustainable products, and that despite COVID, that they've still been able to see, they've accounted for more than half the growth in products in the 2015 to 2019 period. So I think the sustainability propositions are now really starting to have that economic or consumer buy-in. I would counter that with that I do see that it's still maybe niche in some ways, and how you apply that to a mass market may be a little different, but that's where we go back to those sort of, I guess, shades of sustainability depth, and how you really understand what your audience or your target market is really wanting. So I think the rewards that I see from, getting it right, and definitely how you as communicators help with that, is you build up that trust and transparency. We also then get that lens from what the external market want to know, to then help us on what we might want to improve, and how we road test our initial thinking around that. And we're also, by providing that information back out, one, in a way that's digestible, two, that meets the brief, if you like, of what that audience is wanting to hear or understand, is we're building that comfort and that understanding and assurance in that that way around trust and transparency of what we are doing and how we are sort of taking that approach and responding to, you know, the drivers that I mentioned earlier, which I think are only really escalating. If we go to the next slide, and I think this is an area that I think is a great point of discussion, is really what is the role of the communicator. And when I was putting this together, I had to laugh at you know, some of my experiences where things have gone well or not so well, working in different organisations with different comms teams. And you know, the communications professionals that I've worked with have really helped me tell my story, or what is it that I'm actually trying to do. And a good example of that was, this is, you know, quite a while ago, but I'd been working in a manufacturing or a company that manufactured products, and I was very excited that we'd done all this upgrade to machinery and we'd replaced all these things and made it all very efficient. And honestly, the comms person's eyes were just glazing over, and she looked at me and she said, what did it do? Like, what was the point of all of that upgrade? And I said, oh, we reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. She's like, right, let's start with that, and then you tell me how you got there, because this is, I don't need an engineering lesson on boilers and condensers, etc. So by actually having that point made to me, I thought I was being quite clear, but I wasn't. And that was really important. That's something that I've always now used, going, okay, what's the headline and how do I work back from that? I think the other piece that, another story that I'll tell that was also quite interesting is around the 80-20 rule. And comms people work to deadlines that I don't even know sometimes how they keep up with, but it's really that 80-20 rule of, if we don't give me the information, you are going to miss the window. And my need for perfection was not always required. And I think that was also another really important lesson that I got, that some information can go out at 80%. Now, you've got to know your audience and you've got to know what information, and I don't suggest that numbers are the roughly right. I think they definitely need to be very correct. But that 20 rule is really helping us understand what it is that's important, and how do we get that and respond in a way that's really quick and responsive. I think from a comms side is, you have such a good lens on the different audiences, and we don't really have all of that in our mind. We're beavering around probably finding something to fix or improve. We don't necessarily know that. So I think that's really important for us to be cognizant of that, and actually ask you guys, who are our audiences, who is interested in that. And my experience working with marketing teams has been invaluable in being able to really zero in on who that is. I think what's also important, and it sort of reflects on that other point I made earlier, is you help us focus our intent and our message. And, you know, sustainability people want to do everything all of the time, but it's not always practical, and it's not always purposeful. And you can really help us stage gate that and respond to what's coming, and prioritise and what really makes sense and what's materially important for the business. I think that can really help, and vice versa. We can also bring in, I guess, that materiality factor from the sustainability side and help you guys understand that as well. And I think the final point that I would say on the role of the communicators is, you have the headline of what's coming next, and what we need to be aware of and how we prepare. And I think how that dialogue is maintained, and having comms as part of programs is essential, and change and marketing, etc., is something that I've definitely learned a lot from. But how do we actually keep our eye, because we have our eye on the future as well, it's just maybe our horizon is slightly different, but how do we bring those together and actually mutually reward in some ways both of our purposes? I think that's really important. So the final slide, I really wanted to, I guess, leave with this and turn our minds to some of the future considerations. So I do see sustainability really as a patchwork. We do sometimes see that everyone has to do everything all of the time. And I don't know that that's always material and relevant. And I think how we look at ourselves across the industry or across a sector or with our peers and sometimes with our competitors as that patchwork and who does what to make most sense. I think that, and most material of importance, I think that's a really interesting thing to reflect on. I also think that, do what we do well. Sometimes we get distracted, or we need to be focused on getting the basics and then building from there. I think that's also a really important point. The information that is consistent and comparable, if you guys have ever worked on sustainability reports, the amount of metrics that we have, that honestly it blows your mind. There's been a recent release, I think it was maybe only last week, the Big Four accounting firms and the International Business School have created ESG standards across people, planet, prosperity and governance. According to this, there are 21 core metrics and 34 expanded, and they're really wanting to tout this as an integrated and I guess coordinated approach. I am all for that, but I have an engineering background and would like to see a one in, one out policy, that we retire metrics that just don't add value and don't drive performance or outcome, and that if we are going to have that consistency and comparability, that we don't just add and keep building out, that we actually strip back and focus what is the outcome and what is the impact we're seeking. And I think that narrowing down or really zeroing in is a really important process that we need to do. The other one there is around the radical transparency, and that's what I talk about, with customers or consumers or anyone really wanting to know more about what we're doing. And I think technology has an incredibly important role to play here. We don't necessarily, sustainability people don't necessarily have technology as a historical skill, but I think it's something we definitely need to get on point for. And that was the topic of my TED talk, was around using technology to accelerate sustainability in supply chains. We talk about blockchain, we talk about AI, traceability, apps, all those sorts of things. I think that is really, really important. And then the final point there is, making continuous disclosure continuous. So, if you're a listed company, you'll have continuous disclosure obligations, but they're still at point in time. Is there ever going to be a time when you can kind of dial up the online report and just get a constant feed? I don't know. I don't know whether that's done. Maybe that is something that's happening, but the lag that we see, most reporting, lag and lead indicators, or what's happened as opposed to us being able to correct, or what's going on right now. I think that's something, again, that technology is going to help us with, but also that appetite to want to be able to continuously disclose. And then that brings a whole range of other, I guess, challenges and problems that need to be solved for with it. So I really do see that where I say kind of the, I guess, emerging of what we're making and what we're telling, and how do we bring those pieces together. But there's that consistency and that streamlining that I think is really important, and both our fraternities or cohorts or whatever collective noun we want to use for each other are critical in getting that to work. So they were my reflections, and very happy to kind of open up to questions or chat through that further.
Thank you, Olivia. Really appreciate the overview. This is just so fascinating for me as well. It's just so interesting. And we've gotten a few questions here just to kind of expand on the conversation. One here specifically, and I'll just read it here. So from a B2B perspective, do you have any tips for how to balance a customer demand on, detail and sustainability aspects of a product versus what a listed company may be able to detail from a disclosure perspective?
Look, that's a really interesting question. And it's, I guess if it's coming from, your customer wants, and you're a manufacturer and they want to know the ins and outs of where everything's come from, I guess it's about them having, and this is part of that transition, if you like, and take the Modern Slavery Act. That's definitely something where, there's a deep desire to know Where did it come from? What were the conditions? How were they paid? That sort of thing. I think it's about having that trusted relationship with your customers, understanding the motivation, because at the end of the day, they'll want to be safeguarding something as well. Are you both trying to safeguard the same thing? And you can work on that. If there are, legal reasons or, IP reasons, and it's not my area of expertise, but if there are very specific reasons, is there another way you can answer that root cause without, breaching that? But I think that point between the information of a customer and a supplier is exactly what that, and it's the same as when I've worked for a retailer here, and we get questions from customers going, what happened here? What happened? Look, the more you ask me, the less I have time to go and find it out. So give me 5 and we'll come back. And it's just kind of that overarching, how do we sort of solve for that? Because there are going to be more people. There is one say, open the doors. What happens? If you go down that scenario, in this, we've had, that conversation going on. If you go down the scenario of being completely transparent, you're going to have to accept that you're going to find things that you don't like. And people are going to look at you and go, oh, you've got that. And it's like, yes, but this is what we're going to do about fixing it. So you can kind of dance around it, or you can drive headlong into it. And I think we're getting closer to that point. But I think understanding the root cause, understanding what pressures they're facing, are they similar? How do you actually industry level, so you're not disadvantaging your peer editors as well? Because questions can ask on one side but not be answered on the other. And so you really do need to go, well, let's make this a joint disclosure or a communal disclosure. But I think it's going to be one we're not going to be able to avoid in some ways, unless there's a strong legal reason.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. That's a really great answer. And follow on to that. So you talked about radical transparency. We have a question here. As I see leaders still unwilling to disclose where they fall short on goals, and how can we overcome this resistance?
Look, I hear you. I think if companies miss it, they get roasted in the market for reasons that might be right and might be not so right. We have to and this kind of rubs up against that sustainability fraud aspect. My personal view is, I'd rather have a hairy goal and just miss it than not have it at all. But what we need is that understanding from whoever the reader is who's about to bop us over the head. Because the reason there is reticence is because you get your head locked off. And that's not what we're trying to do. We are trying to be ambitious, or we're trying to be clear. And you've come from probably decades of reticence to be open. The minute you raise your head up, if you get knocked, you're not going to want to do it again. So there needs to be some understanding, even behind those doors, that this is what we're doing. But you also have to be really authentic in what it is you're trying to do. And I think if there's, those actors out there who are kind of getting creative, that's not what we want to see either. And that's really where the NGO is holding the stick to say, we want you guys to be honest, transparent and authentic, but we also want to open up the door to say, hey, we didn't get there and this is what happened. This is what we're going to do to fix it. Or actually we've pivoted, or actually we don't think it's adding value anymore and here's why. The more the economic and commercial aspects of a business are integrated with the sustainability, that argument is become clearer, but I think we're still kind of pushing them together a little bit. Dare I say, I don't know whether it's a good thing to say or not. As new people emerge and arise through the organisation and get to decision-making levels, you may see a bravery and an openness of that kind of new thinking. And definitely, we know one of the stats is around, the millennials, homogeneous mass of people, which I am not one of, I'll give you the heads up. But those, apparently only those guys want to, I don't agree with that. I think everyone wants to work for purpose. We just have different ways of kind of expressing it. We are going to be the leaders of the business one day. And we need to help those who are currently ahead and comfortable, but also, you know, be ambitious and take over the company and then be open. That's what I'd like to sort of do. But.
Absolutely. No, that makes total sense. No, thank you for that. That's great. I have another follow-up question here too. So it sounds like they may have clashed with the communications team. So what differently with the benefit of hindsight?
Oh, look, I totally clashed. I'm sure you can tell from my personality that I don't sit back quietly. Look, I would really educate myself. And look, I was, you know, one of those bright young things that came out of a paddock. I think I once got asked, you know, where do people like you come from? And I'm like, oh, we grew up in a paddock. And then we all get released into the wild, just one at a time. And I would actually educate more about what comms is. And I think, you know, comms might get a bad rap in some times. And I didn't know what they do. I'm like, don't you just tell stories and like polish things, make them look better? Like, I don't know. So I think we all kind of hold different professions. Had I actually been, you know, the benefit of hindsight, what is it that you guys are motivated by? What do you need to respond to from like the organisation perspective? Here's what I'm, you know, do that shared kind of, and rather than be dismissive, or rather than getting objectionable when someone wanted me to make things clearer, not, you know, that's not my problem if your audience doesn't understand it. That's probably not the best way to respond to that. So I would definitely self-educate on what the comms, its multiple forms, is really there for, and how then that can benefit, and how I can benefit that.
Yeah, that's excellent. And kind of on the other side of that, so what is the best way to get up to speed quickly on sustainability?
So look, I think the best way is spend time, and it depends on how you kind of work. We talk about shadowing, or we talk about, you know, swapping teams and these sorts of things, but actually be part of a project that's got a sustainability bent. And actually what's important to us, our narrative, everyone has their own different kind of lingo and slang. I don't know one sustainability person who doesn't love talking about what they do, ad nauseum. Maybe give us a time box. But we will be we're very generous with our knowledge, because the whole point of why we exist and get out of bed in the morning is we actually want to make the world a better place sometimes. And it works better if everyone does it. The competitive issues are not the same. And we share our knowledge and how a communications person sees that in practice, the experiential type of understanding, as opposed to here's a report or here's this. See it in practice, get a feel of factory, see how the efficiency program, because comms people also have different skill set. They tap into, you know, intrinsic motivators that we don't necessarily see. So how, you know, experience it, go and talk to the plant manager, talk to the person, talk to the beneficiaries, get that emotional connection, and you're like, right, now I get it. I understand that. And that will depend on your industry. If you're in a technical industry, go to the, you know, the factory production plant. If you're in a not-for-profit, go and see your target impact community and really experience that. And I think, you know, one of the big things that really important is that storytelling, and how I'm not a storyteller, I write reports on one page with red, amber, green status, but how do you actually turn that into a story? I think that's really helpful. But I think the experience of it, opt into projects. If a sustainability group of a comms person, it should, and maybe it should be you guys, and just sort of push in. That's how I would look at it. We push in when we're not invited to things.
No, I definitely relate to that too, just coming from such a technical side of throughout my entire career in energy, and just diving in and learning yourself. I mean, that's great advice.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. I have a couple of other questions here that are a little specific here. So we have one that says, from your perspective, is there any reason a large publicly traded company or even a large privately held company should nudge an ESG report so they can share that level of radical transparency with stakeholders?
Do I think there's a reason they shouldn't?
Yes,
No.
that's correct.
No. To be personally, obviously these are all my personal opinions, but no. And the reason being is I don't think we're at that point anymore where we can not do it. And I'm assuming that's absolutely, like, we are silent on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
You have governance as a minimum, and the G in the ESG is the governance piece. You have to report on some stuff.
And absolutely. And there's a follow-up here as well, because it seems like there's so many benefits to communicating an ESG position. So for companies who are not yet reporting, what would you say to them?
Start small. So don't try and get the GRI and the 480,000 metrics and hit them all at once. Really focus on the materiality. And the way I look at this is another retrospective that I've learned over my career is, what is your organisation there to do? What is its core purpose? Take that purpose and hardwire sustainability into it as a, plant the, things with dirt and plants in people's hands. Put the seed in it, but make it relevant to your core purpose and strategy. And then, every organisation, even if you're a not-for-profit, has two. You've got a financier and you've got someone who buys or needs your stuff. That's pretty much it. They'll have different importances and different impacts and things they want to see. Find out what they want to see most and how that interacts with your purpose and why you exist, and build from there. But build it build it right the first time. Don't try and do everything all at once. And often the hardest ones, most material, but they're the ones that really need to be sort of thought through. So if I'm an energy company and I get energy, I could do a great, on-site recycling. That's awesome. Not material to my purpose yet, but there are definite benefit, quick win of getting your employees. The other thing I would also say is get a shared understanding of what you mean in your organisation by sustainability, because it actually does tend to be different for each organisation. And companies, you might get somebody from a different, just lifts and shifts what they did somewhere else, but it's not relevant. You need that shared understanding. And the other thing I would also say is it can be driven by one person, but it has to be owned by everybody. And then there's more going into structure, but you can have a really, really big central sustainability team and nobody in the divisions or regions or whatever you look at it. You can have a very light touch at the centre and a big push on the outside. My view and my touch in the centre, big push, because my goal is making sure everyone can contribute in a way that makes sense for the role they're in and what the organisation does.
Yeah, that's great. Start small. Great advice. That sounds like it's key. We have another question here. How would you suggest a company communicate sustainability externally with no real sustainability goals or data?
On the one hand, I might say, wait until you have some. An interesting hypothesis on that would be, imagine you do that for like those, pretend you're 5 years down the track. What did you do? What is the headline you're wanting? And what is your motivation to report when you don't have anything to say? So is it that you've been asked a question and actually that sparked a whole discussion and you're like, oh goodness, we actually don't have anything to say. We probably should have something to say. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, you won't not have anything to say. You just might not know where to find it. And you might not know that you've actually done something. So if you were, again, take a really basic example, every organisation, if it has lights in the building, will use energy. Maybe I'm not biased around energy, but it's really practical. So we have bills that we would have paid unless we weren't paying them. You could get that data out of interest. Is that higher or lower than the last 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Did we do anything? If so, what? There will be somebody, and I can't imagine there wouldn't in an organisation or a team where there isn't. There will be somebody who's doing that you can badge sustainability, but they didn't know it was. They just thought it was a good idea, or it was just made more sense. Because sustainability, particularly from manufacturing or basically any organisation, efficiency. And it's about not using so much stuff to make what you need, and just reducing that. So there probably will be something there. It's just if you can find it. You don't have to get it all validated straight away, and you could kind of do the early entry and say, look, this is what we think is important to us. This is where we've come from, and this is what we're doing. This is what we're going to do looking forward, and maybe focus on that forward-looking piece.
Excellent. No, that's great expertise lent there. Another question here, kind of more focused on the future. So how do you see the sustainability sector, if we can call it that, evolving in the future?
Look, I think at a macro level, and I sort of look at a macro and an individual level, macro level, we need technology, like 100%. If we want to actually, if we acknowledge that regardless of who caused it, didn't cause it, whatever, we have problems that need solving and need solution and adaptation. We need to do that at mass, at the pace we need it. We cannot be sitting there as humans looking through sticks. That is not going to get us to the state we need to be. So we're going to need to amplify with technology. I don't know. I learned what a data stack was literally like 3 weeks ago. I didn't know what that was. Like, what even is that? A hard drive. Anyway, so we need to educate ourselves on that, but we also need to work out what other avenues we have and levers we have to accelerate. At an individual level, I actually think we're all going to start blowing into one, and we're all going to have different kind of that cross-pollination of skills. So the two, I guess there's probably more, but the two core from a sustainability angle, if they may come from marketing, comms, change, kind of humanistic side, or they've come from the technical, engineering, maths, science, that sort of side. They're the two, I guess, core cohorts that I've seen. But the other capabilities we start needing or others have. So, budgeting and accounting and auditing and assurance and risk and communication and program. We're all needing a little bit to basically, I need a bit of what you've got, you need a bit of what I've got, and we're going to create very well-rounded individual employee in employment or in organisations that can do a little bit of everything, and we just get the SMEs to come in when it's either a bit different or a bit funky. And then that's how that's what I think that sustainability sector is going to become. We're going to be a little bit more decentralised. We will give the basics that we know and infuse that in everyone else, and then we start upskilling into the new areas, technology or risk or what have you. But that's how I kind of see it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Technology and collective knowledge. That sounds, like the key there. So we have time for, I think, one more question. So I'll leave you with this one. So be the one thing that you would want communicators on this call to know about sustainability that you'd leave.
I have 2 things. So
okay, excellent.
The first one is, look, at the end of the day, it's actually not that straightforward. And it will always, like for what we do, by the time we've come to you, we've probably made it as simple as our brains have allowed. And it is really complex. because it's completely interconnected, and it's not a linear equation, and it's very hard for us to favor one aspect over another. So I guess it's not straightforward. The thing I would say is it's not as quick as you would like, and so I think so maybe more notice, but also like on the product side, analyses or doing carbon neutral products, I hear that and I think, oh my God, there's so much data. Like, you don't understand. We don't even know where to get that from. Versus, oh my God, we're going to make $1 bazillion on this. It's like, oh, so that's one thing. The other thing, and this is more of a silly one, but it's kind of a bugbear. It's like, it's not superscript. I blame designers on that. I'm sure it's not comms, but honestly, like that, they would be the main things that I think there is, and that speaks to that accuracy. There is to what we try and do, particularly in some of the engineering or science-based communications, that I think needs to have a mutual understanding, but we'll never be as quick, I think, as comms people want. We're trying.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and I'm loving seeing the the subscript comments here in the chat box. So that seemed to hit enough.
I was wondering whether I should save it to your chick. I'm like, is that really patriotic?
Chemistry. Well, you know what? Thank you so much, Olivia, for joining us and for sharing this fantastic presentation and your insight and expertise. It's truly an honor to have you here, and we're so thankful you've joined us on your Friday morning at 8 a.m. and
early again, kind of thing. So that's good. No, good.
Awesome. Well, it's been such a great time just working through this topic with you. And as a reminder for everyone on the call, feel free, if you want to learn more about some events that are coming up, just text JOIN to that number that Austin just dropped in the box. And thank you so much again, Olivia, and everyone else for joining us. Have a great evening or afternoon or day wherever you are. Thank you.
Tell you what happens.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks.